Hey, listeners. Welcome to Straight Wife Trans Life. I'm Lisa, and I'm getting over a cold, so bear with me. In this episode, I'm going to open up about questions I am asked most often as a straight or cisgender wife of a male to female transgender person who identifies as a lesbian. Still with me? Okay, good. If you are the relative or friend of someone whose partner is transitioning, I'm glad you're here, and I have 2 tips for allies. The first, remember to check in and ask that person if it's okay to ask questions. It is such a balance between subtle and blunt when curiosity strikes. And if the transition is new, people may need more time before they are ready to talk. I wasn't ready to talk at first, and now here we are. Second, just remember that people of any gender and sexual orientation may transition, so questions and answers will vary depending on the person. Today's questions are only about my experience. All right, let's get to it. Are you a lesbian now? That has been the number one question I have been asked by adults, and this may surprise you, kids. And hats off to the adults who are open about discussing gender and sexual orientation with children. The more we discuss something, the less weird it is and the better we understand it. I still remember the first time I noticed a much taller woman with a shorter man. I was 8 and it was at a hotel restaurant. This couple was walking through to be seated, and I was fascinated because I was used to seeing the stereotypical tall man, shorter woman formula. And instead of my mom saying, "Get over it, height differences aren't a big deal, let's eat," my mom said what I'm sure a lot of us heard back in the day, and we also may say it now ourselves. Stop staring, you're being rude. Point being, thank you, families and other adults, for taking the time to discuss the world around you with the kids in your lives. And I don't mind being asked if I'm a lesbian. It seems like a natural question to ponder given the situation, but I'm still same old cisgender me, and when a child asks, I keep it simple. I say, I'm not a lesbian, but I'm very supportive of my spouse because we make a great team. She's my best friend. And that is enough detail. I would say the second most asked question is, how is your son coping? Is he okay? He is more than okay because we don't make a big deal about this. And my parents, our friends, the main people in his life, thankfully don't treat us any differently. It breaks my heart that transgender people are often ditched by those closest to them. Don't get me wrong, I still have moments where I need to be alone and grieve pieces of my marriage that I miss, but my son doesn't see that. I keep it separate. All he knows is that it is okay if we don't understand the changes, but we will support each other because we are family, even if it looks a little different than it did before. A good example of how our son is coping is that at the beginning of the transition, he would wait until my spouse left the room to ask why his dad was wearing makeup. And now he corrects me when I forget to use the proper pronoun. So coming in at number 3, are you grossed out by the changes? Isn't all of this weird? Why, yes, it was weird, but it doesn't stay weird. Let me explain. You know how someone you love has that habit you can't stand? Maybe they eat popcorn with their mouth open because they love that crunch sound and it is obnoxious. Or they insist on doing something one way and you always have to fix it after they leave. The transition had that similar feeling for the first several months. My spouse was this guy who was a pretty average jeans and t-shirt kind of guy, and now here she was morphing into a woman who was suddenly sitting a different way, carrying herself a different way, watching her diet more closely, wearing blouses with ruffles. She had this whole new set of mannerisms. Ugh, right? I would get shivers sometimes. But then one day, something changed, and it seemed like this was always how she was. It wasn't a feeling of becoming desensitized to the changes. It was an understanding that this is who she always felt like inside. And now she was living that part of herself out loud. And once I had that, oh, I get it moment, this journey has a lot of those moments, the shivers stopped and I had an easier time using she, her pronouns. I could now see her as a woman. And I can't explain why the change, but it fascinates me how time, patience, and empathy can change a perspective. The fourth most asked question: are you going to divorce? This one has been asked a lot. The short answer: I don't know. All of us who are married ride off into the sunset with intentions to stay married, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The thing is, it took me a long time to find a good one, that person I actually wanted to marry. I've lived with a guy, I've lived on my own and dated lots of guys, and then I met my spouse, and it was an immediate, oh, this is how a healthy relationship looks. Even now, my spouse is very even tempered, shows up where she says she will be, doesn't play games or try to control anyone, and she's really kind to everyone around her. I married the best person for me, and I don't want to get married again. Not that I plan on getting divorced. So, yeah, I don't know. This is followed by number 5. Why do you stay? This is asked alone or as a follow up to are you going to divorce? And when I say, I don't know, I usually get, well, why do you stay? So this question can come off as insensitive, so be careful when asking this one. It is not insensitive to me, but staying is not always an easy option or the best option for couples. Feel this one out before you ask. So let me start with a story. Back in the day, as a single 20-something-year-old, I drove a former coworker to a strip club to pick up her husband's car. He had a few too many drinks there and had to take a taxi home the night before. This was before Ubers and Lyfts for you youngins. And I asked that same question, why do you stay? This incident wasn't the only reason I asked. And she said, it is complicated when you're married. We have kids, we have a house, there are a lot of moving pieces. And my little carefree brain was thinking, so just leave. They did eventually divorce years later for other reasons, but it is complicated. It is not always a choice to stay, so just be careful. I stay because I love my best friend, and she needs me now more than ever, and I don't want her to miss out on our son growing up. Also, have you read the news? There are politicians and people attacking the transgender community with such hate. Hey, politicians, you work for me. Stick to things that actually benefit everyone, like education, mental health for anyone who needs it, fixing roads. Anyhow, when the person you love comes to you, scared to death, and says they love you but can't go on as the person they have been, you find a way to offer support. It doesn't mean you have to stay. You can support someone from a different location. But for me, I understand that being transgender is not a choice. It is life-changing. It can be lonely, and there are a lot of obstacles. I'm looking at you, healthcare and insurance. I love our little family, and right now I am exactly where I want and need to be. My choice. Maybe down the line it makes sense to part ways. But whatever happens, we will always have each other's back. So after that sort of top 5 list of questions, the questions tend to get a little darker and murkier. Some questions get dramatic, like, aren't you sad that this is the first Father's Day for your son without a father? Don't ask that question. All the firsts are sad. If I was out picking up clothes at a department store for my son, I used to swing by the men's section and see what was there for my spouse. And yes, the first time I walked to that section before remembering that I no longer needed to be in that section, that was a tough day. Spouses don't need the reminders or questions that begin with, aren't you sad? Also, don't ask people what their spouse is going to do down there. It ain't your business. Spouses and partners are going through a huge shift in our relationships or marriages. Some of us make it through, some of us don't. Some of us adjust or carry on like usual. Some of us aren't sure how to define where we are yet. We are setting boundaries or drafting a new map for this unfamiliar road we're traveling. Questions are okay, just read the room a little bit. Ask if questions are okay and what is off limits if you're not sure. And thanks to the family and friends who do check in on the spouses or partners. It can be lonely for us and very scary to tell people depending on where we live or the attitudes of our loved ones or people we know. It is a unique situation. All right, next episode, I should be back to healthy, and I will touch on some phrases and terms that I've learned within the transgender community. Until then, check on someone you love. Go grab a coffee together.